This is a photo by Walker Evans, documenting the American landscape. The fantasy and glamour of Hollywood starlets posted on billboards is in stark contrast to the dilapidated and decaying houses. It was a time of the Great Depression where the stock market crashed, wiping out the value of stocks and sending our country into the depths of poverty. Graphic design in America during the 1920s and 30s was dominated by two forms of visual expression: traditional illustration and typography. Broadsides and billboards in America were covered in words, primarily because it was cheap to produce advertisements with sign painting and big wood-type letter forms that could be used over and over again, much cheaper than hiring an illustrator. Modern European design did not make it to the shores of American advertising and design until the 1930s. We saw Aaron Douglas and his mentor, Wendell Reese, bringing the modernist aesthetic to the literary world of the Harlem Renaissance years earlier. Let's take a look at how modernist graphic design met the masses and changed the American complexion. Lester Beale, a young designer in the Midwest, got a hold of some European publications and began to incorporate these intellectual ideas that were coming out of Europe into American design. This Kansas City-born designer received his bachelor's in art history from the University of Chicago in 1926. And as an art historian, Beale educated himself in the world of modernist graphic design. In the libraries of the University of Chicago, he discovered publications such as Moholy-Nagy's I-10, Theo van Doesburg's De Stijl, and Jan Tschichol's De Nieuwe Typografie. He first went to work in Chicago as a graphic designer and then moved to New York to finish out his career. But before we look at some of Beale's work, let me describe the American landscape at this time. In the 1930s, about 90% of urban residents in the United States had access to power, compared to just 10% in rural areas. At the time, President Roosevelt warned that the electricity divide excluded farm families from economic benefits provided by power. But private power companies said that it was too expensive to electrify rural areas, and that even if they did, there was little profit to be made. So President Roosevelt established the Rural Electrification Administration in 1936 with the goal to bring electricity to rural America. Imagine having no electricity and everything that you would live without. At the same time, the notion of electricity was scary to people. With not much knowledge about the way it works, they had this idea that they might lose their farmhouse to an electrical fire, and that made people resistant. The U.S. government, the Rural Electrification Administration, needed a promotional campaign, so they hired Lester Beale. Between 1937 and 1941, Beale produced a series of 8 silk-screened posters for this initiative. At that time, the rural population of America was either illiterate or semi-illiterate. So Beale created easy-to-read messages that were communicated visually. It wasn't necessary to read the words. These simple and clear graphic elements meant long body copy was no longer needed. An illiterate or semi-illiterate audience was driving this aesthetic shift. So the strong emphasis was on visuals over words. Elementary signs like arrows and lines were strategically placed in the picture plane. They were a main form of communication and as a clear directional force to the viewer. The poster's job was to raise excitement within the rural population about electricity. Electricity would mean lighting and washing machines in the home. It would mean radio for news of the day and entertainment. Geometric shapes created the promise of running water. Visual signs that could be understood by this audience. Instead of following traditional American advertising of the time, mostly long copy with inset illustrations, Beale incorporated the modernist ideas coming out of Europe: functionality, clarity of message, simple geometry. In this poster, graphic and photographic images drive the communication. A background of red and white stripes above a blue field symbolize national pride. On top of this strong graphic emphasis, Beale layers a black and white, high-contrast photo of farm children, smiling and looking off into the future. And the silkscreen medium he used to produce these posters favored the bold, flat colors. One job of the U.S. Housing Administration was to eliminate shantytowns. These impoverished makeshift communities began in 1929 and lasted approximately a decade. Shantytowns appeared across the U.S. as unemployed people were evicted from their homes. As the Depression worsened, causing severe hardships for millions of Americans, many looked to the federal government for assistance. To a population entrenched in a depressed economy, this graphic carries a powerful promise: the elimination of shantytowns and the replacement of clean, new housing by the U.S. Housing Administration. Beale incorporated the reality of photography with the immediacy of graphic symbols. Verbal communication is reduced to just 3 words, and the rest is delivered through visuals. This is a war poster for the U.S. government. It was part of a campaign promoting U.S. bonds. Beale uses the technique of photomontage similar to the idea John Hartfield used against the Nazis. With the repetition of form and the opposing meaning in these images, Beale creates a disturbing relationship between the Hitler salute and the raised arm of the Statue of Liberty. Columbia is the symbol of freedom for our country. With these strong symbols, the message is clear: bonds can protect our borders, even without the 6 words. In addition to screen-printed posters, Beale produced advertising design and editorial work introducing modernism to the American consumer. In this Fortune magazine cover design, Beale works with geometric forms layered over a photographic image of 3-dimensional materials. Intuitive placement replaced the centered layout of traditional cover design. This magazine design for photo engraving incorporates a photogram or a cameraless photo inspired by the published work of Moholy-Nagy. Beale experimented with superimposed images and added depth to the page. The drop shadow in this image of the skater joins 2 photos together as one, the principle of reduction or minimalizing, simplifying the graphics. Lester Beale made a significant contribution to the change in American graphic design as an American graphic designer. But graphic design in America also changed significantly as a result of immigrants. 3 had an uncanny connection. They were Russian-born, Paris-trained artists that brought their style to America in the form of fashion editorial design. Queer artist and designer Romain de Turtov was known by the pseudonym Erte, the French pronunciation of his initials RT. He was born in St. Petersburg and moved to Paris in 1912 to work in the fashion industry. Erte flourished in an array of fields, including fashion, jewelry, graphic arts, costume and set design for film, theater, and opera, and interior decor, in a career that spanned nearly an entire century. In 1915, he signed a contract with Harper's Bazaar, and for the next 21 years he contributed original fashion drawings. Strong geometry is married to ornamentation. Erte's work combines the geometric intricacy of Persian miniatures with the Art Deco style that was so prominent during the 20s and 30s. This is one of Erte's set designs for the Aladdin Scheherazade stage set in 1929. But it was his spectacular cover art for Harper's that set this designer apart. From 1915 until 1936, he had a contract to design covers and fashion illustrations for Harper's Bazaar. This January 1915 cover is Erte's first for Harper's Bazaar. Erte's covers project sophistication with bold, flat colors. His drawings are highly stylized abstractions of form, and this simple geometry is combined with minimal line. From the start of the world expositions in the late 19th century and into the early 20th century, the Western world had a mania for all things Egyptian, Aztec, Assyrian, and Asian. Erte's fashion illustrations and designs captured the spirit of the times. They took the editorial fashion world by surprise. Erte's love of color and his elaborate couture designs put Harper's at the forefront of fashion innovation. Early on at the magazine, critics felt that the masses would never understand the designer's over-the-top creations. However, as Erte turned out velvet evening wraps with Asian-inspired sleeves and gold embroidery, as well as gowns encrusted with stones and pearls, Erte's vision became au courant, and the public embraced his genius. Another Russian-born graphic designer, Dr. Mehmed Fehmi Aga, was trained and educated in Paris, then established a career in the American fashion industry as an editorial art director. Born in the Ukraine to Turkish parents, Dr. Aga was educated in Kiev and Paris. Like Erte, he worked first in Paris as a designer. The magazine mogul, Condé Nast, saw his work and hired Dr. Aga to revitalize the American edition of Vogue. He was the art director for Vogue, Vanity Fair, and House and Garden in the late 20s and early 30s. Early magazine covers heavily relied on illustration, until the 1932 edition of Vogue debuted the first full-color photograph. Dr. Aga stripped down Vogue's old-fashioned appearance. He designed the first full-bleed images, printing photographs without borders, right over the edges of the page. He synced the magazine's look with the latest looks out of avant-garde Europe. He assigned a young female art director the task of selecting a different typeface for every headline in Vogue. Thanks to the research in old typebooks and advanced graphic publications from Europe to gather inspiration, C.P. Pinellas designed typography which changed every masthead to fit the content of the issue, creating a constantly fresh approach to the cover design. Inside the magazine, they removed all extraneous design elements from the pages, like decorative ornaments seen in the spread on the left from the early 1900s. Dr. Aga and his team introduced the photo montage to the editorial spread and the use of duotone images. Then he introduced full color to the magazine. He was the first art director to spread the image across the gutter and lay out the publication as double-page spreads instead of individual pages side by side. Dr. M.F. Aga brought the brilliance of European avant-garde experimentation to Condé Nast's flagship publications, particularly Vanity Fair, which, under his direction, would become one of the most influential arts and letters magazines of the era. Our third Russian-born, Paris-trained graphic designer in the fashion industry, Alexey Brodovich. Before moving to America in 1930, Alexey Brodovich was heavily influenced by different avant-garde artists and movements: Dadaists from Zurich and Berlin, supremacists and constructivists from Moscow, the Bauhaus, the Italian Futurists, De Stijl in the Netherlands, and the French movements of Cubism, Fauvism, and Surrealism. Here's some examples of his early advertising work in Paris. Brodovich made the advertising of Martini on the basis of geometric forms and pure colors, reminiscent of the style of constructivism. He incorporated the dynamic diagonal of Van Doesburg's elementarism. In 1934, the editor of Harper's Bazaar, Carmel Snow, hired Brodovich to become the magazine's editorial art director. Together, this legendary woman who ruled the New York fashion industry and a modernist Alexey Brodovich showed America how to reinvent editorial design. First, a significant story about the woman in charge. In October 1933, the Harper's Bazaar fashion editor Carmel Snow brought a model and a Hungarian photojournalist, Martin Munkaczy, to Piping Rock Beach on New York's Long Island. Snow's idea was to shoot a swimwear story for the magazine's December Palm Beach issue in an outdoor location. Until then, the realm of fashion photography had been largely confined to staid studio portraits shot against seamless screens or in ornate salons, with the occasional fake background or prop thrown in for variation. Even before this iconic moment, Snow had been interested in taking fashion outside and experimenting with images that conveyed movement. At first, the editor and this photojournalist who had never even shot fashion struggled to negotiate a plan for the shoot. Then at one point, Munkaczy motioned for the model. and Lucille Brokaw began to run toward the camera. Munkachi captured her in full stride. One click of the shutter changed the overall look and feel of the publication, and this iconic moment altered fashion photography forever. For the next 23 years, Carmel Snow, taking on the position of editor-in-chief of Bazaar, recreated the fashion publication. In 1934, Carmel Snow hired Brodovich to become the art director. He worked for Harper's for almost 25 years, and together they redefined the role of editorial art director. The two of them worked very closely. Between them, they completely redefined magazines and what they looked like. You see Carmel Snow sitting here behind her desk, flanked by editors, looking over photostats of the issue. Alexey Brodovich is seated in the chair. Continuing Snow's vision and rejecting older conventions, Martin Munkachi, along with Brodovich, went to outside locations, creating natural, innovative possibilities. I should add, because of the invention of the small, handheld professional camera, the Leica camera, it allowed photography to be shot on location. A combination of technology and innovation driving aesthetics. Brodovich was brilliant for great camera angles, cropping, and placement of image on the page, and typography was always strategically placed. Here, you see it becomes part of the image. For much of the magazine, Brodovich designed the pages through the lens of the camera. He combined creative typographic solutions with adventurous fashion images. Brodovich commissioned some of the most influential photographers and artists of his time. For example, the image on the right was shot by Dadaist photographer Man Ray. In Man Ray's image, the figure's oblique thrust inspired Brodovich to construct a dynamic typographic page from several sizes and weights of geometric sans serifs. Brodovich radically reworked layout through cropping, contrast, and typographic juxtaposition. Notice how the bend and curve of the text emulates the photo in the spread on the right. And I mentioned Alexey Brodovich commissioned great photographers and illustrators to work for the magazine, like Man Ray and Richard Avedon and Irving Penn, to name a few, A.M. Cassandra, Salvador Dali, and Herbert Bayer. He likened publication design to cinematography, where the placing of visual sequences plays an important role. You can see his design process as he figures out the pagination in the image on the right. He once said, "Art directing and editing are one and the same thing. You have to keep your eye on both the visual and the verbal narration line. You have to tell two stories, one in words and one in pictures, completely separate, but like railroad tracks leading to the same place." Here are some examples of cinematic pacing in his visual sequencing. During the 1950s, Alexey Brodovich designed a visual arts magazine. Portfolio is considered Brodovich's greatest achievement, although it was short-lived, only 3 publications in all. Brodovich had even more creative freedom with his designs for Portfolio magazine. You see here the front and back covers of the 3 publications. Let me show you a beautiful 4-foot fold-out photographic essay Brodovich designed on the Murmurs Parade for the 1950 Portfolio magazine. The Murmurs Parade is a unique Philadelphia tradition, full of costume and street theater. Its zany character is captured in an amazing 6-foot pullout of over 30 photographs taken by Saul Mednick, Ben Rose, and Philadelphia school art students. Brodovich's genius lies in his ability to control the sequential flow of the editorial content, creatively working with each double-page spread. A masterpiece of modernist storytelling and documentation. But the immigrants came from other places besides Russia via Paris. That young designer who chose the typefaces and fonts of the Vogue mastheads for Dr. Aga was C.P. Pinellas. Born in Vienna, she immigrated to the United States and joined Condé Nast in 1933. After working for Dr. Aga's design team, Pinellas became the art director for Glamour, 17, Charm, and Mademoiselle. Like her mentor, Pinellas used bleed photos and commissioned top photographers. On the 1949 cover issue for 17, Pinellas used a mirrored image repeating the masthead and umbrella, but the subtle shift of the model's expression captures the reader's eye and makes the cover striking, engaging, and memorable. Having established herself at 17, Pinellas went on to art direct Charm, a magazine for working women. This cover of Charm uses running text as a backdrop, listing new advances for working women like wrinkle-resistant clothes, plastic placemats, the ready-mix desserts, lipstick that won't wear off, to name a few. In the 1940s, these simple inventions made it possible for women to go to work. This is a sketch of Pinellas's map for the 1942 November issue of Glamour, done with pen and gouache on paper. Notice how she works out the flow and the sequencing of the spreads in the magazine. In this creative spread, horizontal bars of music are turned on their side to create the illusion of rain. You see here two spreads for a series, Women at Work. These emphasize active women through the style of photography, and Pinellas's layouts made imaginative use of references to the work environment. In 1975, C.P. Pinellas was the first woman elected into the New York Art Directors Hall of Fame. Pentagram partner Paula Scher wrote about Pinellas. I quote, "In the 1980s, responding to a mailer she had just received from the Art Directors Club for a series of lectures entitled An Evening with the Best, there were about 12 men in the picture, and CP said to me, 'Couldn't they even find one token woman for this? Just one to keep up appearances?' We couldn't decide which was worse, the group arrogance or the laziness." Paula Scher adds, "It's 40 years later, and I am the age CP was when we first met. And really, not all that much has changed." When Hitler took power, Jewish faculty were prevented from working at universities. This pioneering elite group of theoretical scientists, scholars, and artists were turned into asylum seekers. And in this flight of the intellectuals, many fled to America. The United States reaped the benefits. In the aftercurrents of World War II, avant-garde strategies in photography and design reached the United States via European émigrés forced out of Nazi Germany. These are just some that came. Austrian-born Joseph Binder introduced refined and reduced pictorial elements, flat, powerful graphic statements. He gave flat shapes form with a gradation and with naturalistic use of contrasting shadows and light. Herbert Bayer, the Bauhaus master, created a system for the publication World Geographic Atlas. This was an important milestone in the visual presentation of data. Notice in the example the data for the solar eclipse in the bottom center of the right page and the relationship of planetary sizes. Each spread in the book is a single seamless surface packed with data. French graphic designer and illustrator Jean Carlu created posters to support the U.S. war effort. This is an example of visual and verbal elements acting as one symbol of productivity and work. Production is both image and word. Swiss designer Herbert Matter worked with the camera the way modern designers worked with typography. In 1936, Herbert Matter moved to New York to work as a photographer for Alexey Brodovich. And he became one of the most innovative graphic designers for the furniture manufacturer Knoll International. Beautiful and elegant page design were the hallmark of his work for Knoll. This poster advertises molded plastic chairs. The shape of the product is mirrored in graphic form to elevate advertising to fine art in quality. These are just some of the designers that brought their talents to America as part of the flight of the intellectuals. It was difficult for them to find employment, but in time, through editorial and advertising design, modernism came to America.